Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody back to the start of the second of today's panels on Women and Proof. I'm happy to introduce Dean Catherine Stimson, Dean of the Graduate School of Arts and Science, to say a few introductory remarks. Dean Stimson has a long history with and interest in women's issues. She taught the first women's studies course at Barnard and was a founding editor of Signs, the Journal of Women in Culture and Society. So let's welcome Dean Stimson. Kate.
Thank you, Marcia, and as others have done, may I thank the Courant Institute and the Sloan Foundation for bringing us together today. Let me begin by a very brief but absolutely true story. This year, I was asked what I wanted to do on my birthday. How did I want to spend my birthday evening? And I said I wanted to see a play that had just opened about a woman mathematician. And so I spent my birthday evening at Proof. I spent the beginning of my newest year watching this very interesting play about a woman mathematician unfold. Now, obviously, one of the most interesting things about Proof is the fact that its central character is not just a woman mathematician, but a woman mathematician of probable genius. And it is now my pleasure to introduce this extraordinary panel of women mathematicians. It would be a treat to hear any one of them. It is a rare treat to see them together and to hear them together. You have their bios in your program, so what I am about to say will replicate what you have already read. Marcia Wright will be our moderator. Margaret Wright. Sorry. And I do say Margaret here in my notes. The confusion, Marcia Wright, for what it's worth, is a wonderful historian of Africa at Columbia University. Margaret Wright will be our moderator. Dr. Wright will be our moderator. She is with the Computing Sciences Research Center at Bell Labs, Lucent Technologies. She became head of the Scientific Computing Research Department in 1997. And in that same year, she was elected to the National Academy of Engineering. She was named a Bell Lab Fellow in 1999. And during the year 2000, among the several honors that she won was the Siam Prize for Distinguished Service to the Profession. So thank you, Dr. Margaret Wright, for being our moderator. Among our speakers, Dusa McDuff. She's now at SUNY Stony Brook, though she was born in London, the legatee of a long line of accomplished women. And I went up to her homepage, or a SUNY homepage, to find out about her, and I suggest you all do it, to read about her great-grandmother, her grandmother, her mother, and her. She is the 1991 winner of the Ruth Lytle Sutter Prize, and in 1994, she was elected to that historic group, the Royal Society of London. And then also Kathleen Morowitz of the Courant Institute of NYU, a member of the National Academy of Sciences, only the second woman to be elected president of the American Mathematical Society, the winner of the National Medal of Science, and a great figure here at NYU. Then Mary Pugh from the University of Pennsylvania. I love her homepage. Under her name are the words, "Send me email." And Mary, I hope they do. She has a PhD from the University of Chicago, where indeed Proof is set, and I don't know what you're going to tell us about that, Professor Pugh. She did a postdoctoral fellowship at the Courant Institute, and as you know, she's now at the University of Pennsylvania. Here, Jean Taylor of Rutgers University, the current president of the Association for Women in Mathematics, the author of over 100 publications and 200 invited lectures, an advisor on a children's television workshop program, and in her early work solved a century-old problem about the structure of singularities in soap bubble clusters in films. I myself come out of the humanities. We are known for creating problems. So I'm always pleased when there's someone who has solved a problem. And then Karen Uhlenbeck, the University of Texas, named in 1983 to a MacArthur Fellowship, to the National Academy of Sciences 3 years later in 1986, and in 1990, the second woman to give a plenary lecture at the International Congress of Mathematics. We have before us enormous distinction. It is a great pleasure to have you here at NYU together. Dr. Wright and all of you, take it away.
These are not designed for women's clothing. I do not have a pocket to put this in. Therefore, I hope you will excuse me for holding it. Welcome to the second panel discussion, Women in Proof, which it's a great pleasure for me to chair. We're extremely grateful, all of us, for the opportunity to do this. There's a lovely quote that's in your program that was given in the play yesterday, which is a quote from Gauss, written about Sophie Germain. It's quoted in Proof by Catherine. She said she had memorized it. When a person of the sex, which must encounter infinitely more difficulties than men, succeeds nevertheless, then without a doubt she must have the noblest courage, quite extraordinary talents, and superior genius. Well, I'm sure we all agree with that. I thought I would just start off with a few facts about women in mathematics. So, Sophie Germain was born, I think it said, in 1776. Let's move forward to 1981. The first woman was chosen to give the Gibbs Lecture at the American Mathematical Society. The second woman gave that talk in 1999. In 1990, the first woman was elected to the Applied Mathematical Sciences section of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, the second in 1996. These red asterisks are because that woman is before you now. It is Kathleen Morowitz here on this panel. So Kathleen personally holds two of these distinguished honors. In the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, there are 4 women in a section called Mathematics out of 112. There are 4 women in the Applied Mathematical Sciences section out of 65. 50% of those women are here today. Marcia Berger and Kathleen are 50% of the Academy in Applied Mathematics. Karen and Duza are 50%. So if anything happens in this auditorium, they will say that 50% of the Academy members in mathematics who are women have been wiped out. So what about overall trends? This is a problem where there is a great deal of data, which I won't go through. We may refer to this later. So in 1980, in the US, 16% of the new PhDs were women. That was in 1980, 20 years ago. In 1990, 21%. In 1999, 28%. And I've seen some data, but I couldn't find it on the web the other day when I was looking, that said that this year, the year that just finished, it will be 34%. In this year, if you look at junior and senior women mathematics majors, at the top-ranked schools in mathematics, there's a complicated system of ranking universities. Group 1 is the number of 48 doctoral granting universities which were top-ranked in the 1996 National Academy rating. And they're split into public and private. So if you look at the junior and senior women math majors, it's 36% in the public and 30% in the private. So you might say, well, that's, not representative of their proportion of the population, but it's pretty good, and it's looking better all the time. A couple of other pieces of data. In 1999, tenured doctoral full-time faculty, so that means associate professor and above. Group 1 public, it's 6.4% women. Put another way, 93.6% of those faculty are men. Group 1 private, 4.6%, so 95.4% men faculty in those tenured positions. We believe things are getting better. Let's look at 1999 untenured, tenure-track doctoral full-time faculty. These nuances are necessary because universities hire people not in tenure-track positions. Group 1 public at 16%, Group 1 private at 17%. So in fact, it looks as though the future is getting brighter, brighter in terms of offering opportunities for women. So the questions that the panel is going to think about are the following. Does anyone besides mathematicians say are the following? I've sometimes wondered that. Is there a problem? Would people looking at these numbers say, well, everything is fine, this is perfectly normal, this is what we would expect? If there is a problem, what is it? Can we define it in terms of underrepresentation? How can we define the problem? Is it being solved? Are things happening to make the problem be solved? Is it really essentially solved, which is what some people would argue. It's more or less solved today, that the trend is positive and looking good. So we took 4 themes from proof, which we're going to talk about. The format will basically be that each panelist will speak for between 5 and 6 minutes about her experiences blended with one of these overall themes. We thought that was the way to make this most effective about mixing with the play. First one is about starting a career. So Catherine, the heroine of the play, is just, we think, starting her career. She's achieved success in that she's gotten this great proof. We hope she's on her way to being recognized for it. What are these general issues for women? Effects of traditional societal roles. Notice that Catherine gave up her schooling to take care of her father. Many cases, women are expected to take care of children. Are these traditional societal roles having an effect? The influence of stereotypes. We've all heard the girls can't do math and all that sort of stuff. Are those still playing a role? And finally, we wanted to think about some strategies for advancing chances for success. So what things might happen, might we have experienced that would advance our opportunities? And before I sit down, I wanted to tell a little anecdote about toughness and whining. Every woman mathematician I know has had the experience where she has attempted to talk to a colleague, usually male, about some irritating thing that's happened or disheartening thing that's happened. Often these are very small. And people will say, you've got to be tough. You've got to be tough. It's a tough world. Stop whining. Just get on with it. Does everyone who's a woman here agree with me? This has happened to you. You've got to be tough. And I think my message is that people sometimes don't understand what tough is until they're in the situation themselves. So I'm going to illustrate this with an anecdote, which is a friend of mine, Julia, and I at Bell Labs, we're trying to encourage more women to apply to work there. So we suggested to a group of recruiters that they should go and talk to women's groups when they went to universities. This seemed like a really good idea. You know, there'd be a person from Bell Labs and they would say, we welcome you, we want you to come here. And there were several of the recruiters who were men who were clearly just, you know, they'd say, we don't want to do that. You know, we really don't want to do that. And Julie and I would say, but this would be good, it would show we care, and on and on and on. And they just were getting truly agitated and upset and just couldn't stand it. And finally, I said, what's wrong with you? What's the problem? And one of them said, I would feel so weird standing up in front of a group of 40 women. And Julie and I looked at each other and said, gotta be tough. so for the first time, he realized what it was like to be on the other end. And on that note, I will sit down and I will ask Kathleen, when I'm out of the way, to carry on. Thank you.
Is this on? Well, Margaret's statistics sound pretty good. Things are much better than they were. They could be better. But Proof, as a play itself, presents a very stark picture of the life of a mathematician. Together, it looks like women's objective is to entice more women into an unrewarding career involving endless hours of work and a great deal of sacrifice. I think others in this panel are going to address the problems for women who have made a positive choice that what they want to do is to be a mathematician. So I'm going to begin by talking a little bit about myself, because I belong to the class of women who really didn't want to become a mathematician, but sort of fell into it for lack of better alternatives. And I think that the enticement has got to be to present mathematics to women as something for which they can have passion and love and be willing to devote those long hours to. So how did this come about? Don't forget that I was an undergraduate more than 50 years ago, so things have changed a lot, but I thought you would like to know a little bit about what it was all about. So first of all, I was a feminist. I was determined to have a family and a career in something, but what that something should be, I didn't know. So to begin with, I won a prize to go and study mathematics, so therefore I had to study mathematics. And then I realized, after I'd done 2 years of college, that I wasn't going to be good enough to be a creative mathematician, and the alternatives were to be either a high school teacher or an actuary, and I didn't want to be a high school teacher. So I went, as the young men did who wanted to go into actuarial science, in the summer to look for a summer job at an insurance company. And I was told that this was the beginning of a lifelong commitment to actuarial science. But since I was surely going to marry and have children, and they didn't allow their employees to marry and have children, I couldn't have the summer job. Now, they did give me another job, but that's another story. So that was my first career try. Then I wanted to become an officer in Her Majesty's Navy. This was during the war. So I went down to the recruiting office, and they told me I would have to begin by scrubbing floors. Now, I knew my fellow male students didn't have to begin by scrubbing floors. They were immediately made officers. So I said, no dice, thank you very much. Feminism won out over patriotism. Then, as the war drew to a close, it became possible to go to post-war India to be a high school teacher, and that sounded very romantic and wonderful to me. But a woman mathematician, Cecilia Krieger, met me and heard that that was my plan, and she was horrified that I wasn't going to go to graduate school. So I agreed to go to graduate school, but not in mathematics. I thought, since I liked fluid dynamics, I'd be an aeronautical engineer. I'd get my training under von Karman at Caltech. Sorry, closed to women. So I went to MIT. There I took up electrical engineering. It would allow me to make that move over. But I was all thumbs in a lab. I got the electric charge onto me instead of onto whatever instrument it was. And my accuracy in arithmetic was very bad, and it's very important. So I went back to mathematics. I got my master's degree. I went to Bell Labs and asked for a job in communications. Again, they offered me a job below grade because of my sex, so I said no, thank you. And so I then went to the Courant Institute, not called that then, and fell in love with the warm, friendly, and mathematically enthusiastic environment. And thus I became a mathematician, and eventually came to absolutely love mathematics, have the passion for it, and be willing to work the long hours. So the low figures of women in mathematics are in fact in part due to the fact that all the alternatives where I had to pull back and go into mathematics, they are now opportunities today for women. So to get more women mathematicians, you will have to somehow persuade the talented woman to love mathematics with the necessary passions, and that's a big challenge. But it's clear that our heroine, Catherine, had that passion and was willing to do the work.
Okay, next, Mary Pugh.
First, I'd like to thank the organizers for their hard work and for inviting me to be on this panel. I'm cowed by the eminence of my peers. I am here as the puppy. So, let's go for it. So, I'm frequently asked how I became interested in mathematics. And in fact, I didn't participate in any math Olympiads or Putnam exams or mathletics or in any sort of special programs intended to nurture young women. In fact, the only mathematical nurturing I remember is from when I was a child attending school in Geneva, Switzerland. There, they would split up the boys and girls and teach the girls how to sew and the boys how to add fractions. And when my parents asked me how my first day at school went, I told them about my sewing class, and my father went to the school and had me put into the boys' class. So at age 6, I was the only girl in the room, and very little has changed since. Fortunately, I like men, but otherwise it would be hell. So rather than go on about my history, I'd just like to say that in the past few years, whenever I met a successful female mathematician, I've found that she usually has an unusual personality and a fairly non-standard history, much more so, in fact, than the male mathematicians. And also, Margaret didn't really mention this, but at each stage of development, the percentage of females decreases. When you look at math majors and then first-year graduate school and then getting your PhD and postdoc and tenure track, the percentages of females decrease. And these differences point directly to an environment that is more toxic for women than it is for men, and many otherwise viable women have clearly been lost. As Kathleen alluded, being a research mathematician is a very hard and at times very rewarding calling. It can be harrowing, especially for the novitiate. If there was an Olympic sport in delayed gratification, research academics would be very well represented. There's a constant winnowing process. At Berkeley, about 1 in 10 math majors went to graduate school in math, and at Chicago, about 1 in 4 first-year graduate students graduated and got research postdocs, and at Courant, about 2 in 3 or 3 in 4 postdocs got research tenure track positions. Since I don't have tenure, I defer to the others on further statistics. I was always at top places, so the numbers I gave you are the most optimistic, least winnowing ones. But the end effect is that 1 in 60 math majors get research tenure track positions. And bearing in mind that there aren't many female math majors to begin with and the percentages get worse each step down the line, there just aren't that many top young women on the market, which is then again reflected in the statistics that Margaret showed us. So the thing is that both women and men have real opportunities, but women actually have more false opportunities and barriers to sort out than men do. And we're all walking through this kind of bizarre maze in our desire to keep doing what we love doing, but the women's maze has additional diversions and dead ends and minotaurs that the men's maze doesn't have. And the women I know who've survived to my age and level have done excellent research, and they have extremely good luck, and they have flawless pedigrees, and have excellent social skills. But we also tend to marry later and have children later, if at all, than our male peers, and we're held to more and higher standards than the males are. I've heard excellent females be sniped at for geekinesses that never would have been commented upon in males, or have their personal lives speculated on in hiring discussions. And women have this drizzle of small and large griefs handed to them by witting and unwitting and conveniently thoughtless agents. So point number 4 was things that we could possibly do to improve the lot of the underrepresented. So I'd like to close with a plea to the conveniently thoughtless agents. So that you're causing more harm than you may realize. There are many stages in the system at which 1 or 2 names have to be chosen from a sea of candidates whom to hire as a postdoc or tenure track or as a full professor or to be the next chairman or to sit on the department's executive or personnel committee or to be an editor of a journal or to sit on a review panel or to be a keynote speaker or be on the National Academy of Sciences, whatever. When given this job, there's a universal response of looking in one's immediate surroundings and choosing from there. And maybe send collaborators an email to see if they have an up-and-coming grad student or postdoc or colleague, but that's about it. And if pressed, we'll admit that this isn't terribly fair, but if you've got good connections, you'll get a pretty good hire, or whatever it is. And worse yet, even when we think we're being fair, study after study reveals that we have unconscious biases that we act on. And we instinctively reward aggressive behavior, and we're nervous about sticking our necks out for someone non-standard unless we're guaranteed success. On a practical level, fewer will fault you for bringing in a male who's ultimately denied tenure. So it's easier to take a chance and unconsciously lower the bar for someone, for a male. So I guess we have to be vigilant to have any chance of occasionally overcoming our biases. Hiring, promotion, assigning of professional duties and rewards should be done in a scrupulously regular manner. There should be national searches, all applications should be looked at, the positions should be in good faith, as should the interviews. And this can be done if you follow regular protocols. The University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign is a lean, mean hiring machine because it has good protocols that it follows carefully. They have excellent and happy young researchers despite being in the cornfields. I understand that those in power prefer to have wiggle room in their procedures because it makes it easier for them to get what they want. But with wiggle room, things get blurry and the best candidates don't get the job. The person that you're most comfortable around does. And similarly, if you're asked who should be the next chair or editor or keynote speaker, you know, sit down and make a list and take some time and ask others if you're missing any names, and then and only then start culling names. And if you act in a conscious and mindful manner instead of following the path of least resistance, then you'll be removing some of the ghost opportunities and barriers in front of the small number of women and minorities who've actually made it as far as they have.
Okay, our next speaker is Duza McDuff. She needs the...
Thank you. So I want to talk about the idea that it's somehow unfeminine to enjoy and be good at mathematics, even possibly that it's unnatural for a woman to be outstanding in any important intellectual endeavor. This idea was certainly alive and well when I was growing up. My mother, as we heard in the introduction, I mean, I come from a long line of feminists, and my mother always had a career, she always had a job, and she expected me to have a career and earn my own living, and she encouraged me with mathematics. However, she also thought that men were the ones with the real talent, which was very difficult for me. I think these ideas have a long life, they're very influential, and so I want to actually go back. I read a very interesting book a while ago called Gender and Genius by Christine Battersby that had some really remarkable quotations, and so I'd like to I'd just read them to you to some extent. So here is talking about in the Renaissance, it was males who possessed judgment and ingenium, and women who had too much in the way of feeling, too little in the way of reason to be real artists. Now for Rousseau, the equations are reversed. Women have too much judgment and too little emotion. So here is Rousseau. He says, women in general possess no artistic sensibility nor genius. They can acquire a knowledge of anything through hard work, but the celestial fire that emblazons and ignites the soul, the inspiration, these sublime ecstasies that reside in the depths of the heart are always lacking in women's writings. These creations are cold and pretty as women. They have an abundance of spirit but lack soul. They are 100 times more reason than passion. Okay, so that's Rousseau. Now, Kant does not deny that some individual women might be capable of masculine intellectual pursuits. But what he says is the following: her sex has just as much understanding as the male, but it's beautiful understanding, whereas ours should be a deep understanding, an expression that signifies identity with the sublime. Deep meditation and a long sustained reflection are noble but difficult and do not well befit a person in whom unconstrained charms should show nothing else than a beautiful nature. Laborious learning or painful pondering, even if a woman should greatly succeed in it, destroy the merits that are proper to her sex. Okay, so that's Kant. And then here's a little comment that Christine makes. She says, what's so disturbing about Kant's notion of genius is that he dissents from the pre-romantic emphasis on passion as an integral part of genius, showed all kinds of different characteristics, many of which have nothing to do with our stereotype of the mother and what females should be. So I think it's just very important to take these standard notions of what femininity and masculinity is with a huge grain of salt, perhaps to discard them and start to rethink the paradigms. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Karen Uhlenbeck.
Well, I think I'm speaking on a much more local issue. I reacted to the play Proof as authentically addressing several different kinds of problems which women face, particularly women mathematicians. I actually basically really liked seeing Kathy as a role model. Somehow or other, she had a certain glamour that I haven't seen very often. I mean, I like plays and I go to a lot of them, but I get real tired of the pretty women or the so forth. And I like Kathy very much personally, and I don't know, and I also did not, I think I reacted, that was pretty typical mathematics, so if it is probably pretty hard life, Kathleen. Today, anyway. I was interested, I don't really know to what extent this is true, but the style and the interactions of the play felt a lot like when I was an undergraduate and graduate. I was a math student. So I sort of identified with being a student, being a math student, and being sort of smart, but not in it. But actually, what was more serious for me was 40 years later, I am the eldest daughter concerned with the care of elderly parents. And I have successfully avoided a lot of serious problems that come from negative attitudes towards women by avoiding elitist institutions like the University of Chicago. And I am still doing it, mind you. I don't feel tempted back into the fold. I also have succeeded in involving a large number of major responsibilities in life, partly in order to do mathematics, which is one of the few things, besides climbing mountains, which I'm too old to do anymore, that I enjoy. But I can't seem to avoid having parents. It's one of these problems that I have, and it falls on women. And I think this is actually a very serious issue. Some women have more difficulty with the stereotype, and that women are not brilliant. I will not say genius, but not brilliant. Some have more difficulty with the practical problems, but it's a rare person that actually escapes. It's a rare woman that escapes serious issues about both of them. Today, young women rarely meet the outright hostility we actually faced in the 1960s, but they're never credited with brilliance. Life is actually also more complicated for everybody, and it's my sense that the practical problems have become more overwhelming for young couples. I mean, the situation of women in research mathematics seems particularly discouraging to me, as I am nearing the end of my research career. And of course, so you think people were worried about becoming 25. Well, I mean, let me tell you, you can do math and have a lot of fun of it for a lot longer than that. But when you get towards 60, you do start to worry. That's a serious issue. And like most mathematicians, I really like to think that there is a more brilliant young group coming up that's going to solve all the problems that we couldn't do and find even better ones. It just happened, and they're there. It just happens that not very many of those people coming up are women. This is, Mary gave you some statistics. The statistics, by the way, if you look at the top 10 universities, are much worse than they are in general, and that play was about a top university. It was about the, creme de la creme of mathematics, the university. And it's discouraging to have a lead of life that was more or less pioneering. I think that would be the right way to describe Kathleen, and I think myself, is that to discover that it really isn't all that different. What are we leaving behind us is, some more open fields for the pioneers to go through. Despite years of rhetoric, very little seems to have happened. My university happens to have a number of senior women in mathematics, most hired as half of a couple, including myself. So we're one of the few universities that actually makes concessions to the fact that mathematicians are people with spouses and children and parents and stuff. 30% of our graduate students, half our graduate majors are female. 50% of our adjunct faculty is female. In the nearly 15 years I have been there, we have interviewed exactly one woman for a tenure-track job at the assistant professor level in pure mathematics. One woman out of how many men? I am soon not only going to be an old lady, but I'm getting isolated and embittered. I think there are good programs out there. I think a lot of the people here have been involved with them. The programs that the American Women's Society runs for graduate students help avoid some of the sense of isolation. I hope the program that I'm involved with at the Institute for Advanced Study also helps. And I wish I had more energy and more ideas. What I would really like is for this panel to meet again, maybe add a few women, and sit down and hash out what really might make a difference. Because I know enough young women to know what's stopping them. I just don't know how to stop what's stopping them. Thank
you. Our last speaker is Jean Taylor.
I was going to start off by showing a couple transparencies, but I think the words that are on the transparencies you've already heard from a lot of the other people. I mean, in 1971, Ruth Silverman said in a letter to the editor of the notices of the AMS, as a result of surveys, it becomes apparent that women are predominantly at the bottom of the pyramid, irrespective of qualifications. Many academic departments have no full-time female faculty. In many, the percentage of female faculty is far below the percentage of females among qualified applicants. In many departments, women with PhDs hold positions below the rank of assistant professor and are kept at these low ranks, and women tend to be hired on a marginal, temporary, one-year basis. And not only is it true, I mean, you were giving specific statistics at your university. We have wrote an article about this that was in the notices of the AMS a year ago. At the top 10 institutions, there are precisely 9 tenured women out of 288 tenured individuals, which is 3.1%. There were only 5 in 1991, but this increase was in just 2 institutions. Michigan going from 1 to 4, and Princeton going from 0 to 2. 6 of these top 10 institutions still have no women whatsoever. On the other hand, and if you look, okay, how about the increase? There's been an increase of 31 tenured women since 1991 out of an increase in 214 positions. That's still at less than half the rate that the women are being produced as PhDs. And the part-time faculty, that's 37% female. I mean, this is the same data here. I can duplicate my situation at Rutgers. I was hired in the fall of '73, and there hasn't been a woman hired to a tenure-track position since. We used to have a lot of women. We are now down to 4. One of them is retiring. We're down to 3. I am the youngest at age 56. And we had one woman come in with tenure, and she left after 2 years, and that's it. I mean, this idea that things are just going to get better if we just sit and wait and for things to happen does not seem to be being borne out. So why? And what can we do? I have the same feeling. One thing I would like to point out, in case you missed it, in last Thursday's New York Times, there was something about Mars and Venus on the net, gender stereotypes prevail. Here's the quote. In another study done by Dr. Nass and his colleagues, students were tutored in technical subjects both by a computer with a male voice and by one with a female voice. The female-voiced computer was rated significantly less informative about the technical aspects than the male one. Both computers read the same information. There have been other studies like this, and when I've tried to talk to them about this, to men mathematicians, they say, well, that's students. We're a lot more objective. You mean this is... I don't believe it. I believe that these are societal things that affect everybody and that you have to pay attention to it. There's another thing about this idea of small things and being tough. This is a quote from Virginia Valian's book, Why So Slow, which I recommend reading for older people but not for younger ones because it's too discouraging. The effect of accumulated small gnat-like injustices can grow exponentially to something sizable. I mean, we all know about exponential growth, you know? And there's no way sort of around the problem. For example, speaking out in meetings. If you don't speak out, you lose a little bit. If you speak out and are ignored or put down, you lose a lot. So do you lose bit by bit, you know, these small gnat-like things, or do you lose a whole lot at once, you know? I mean, what are you supposed to do about it? Think about what this play Proof would have been if there were role reversals. What if it were a son instead of a daughter? First of all, as Karen has pointed out, what is the likelihood that it would have been the son taking care of the father? It's possible. Of course it's possible. There are certainly men who do, but the likelihood of the son abandoning college and staying home to take care of his father would be very small. Secondly, don't you think it would be much more likely that the son of a brilliant mathematician might be accepted as a potential brilliant mathematician? And what if it were, think about this young male mathematician who, you know, the former student. What if that were a woman? Can you imagine a woman mathematician acting like that? You know, I mean, it's just, if you try and, you know, I mean, I would find it very interesting to put on this play with everybody in the wrong sex and just see what happens, you know? It's a very, very interesting thing. All right, here's another thing I would like to read from. This is from Sylvia Nasser's book. She's, I guess, on one of the panels tonight, A Beautiful Mind.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, okay, this is about Princeton University. I got my PhD at Princeton. Tea was the high point of every day. Mrs. Lefschitz and the other wives of senior faculty poured the tea and passed the cookies. That was still true. At the Institute for Advanced Studies, the wives of the faculty members were still pouring tea. I don't know if they still are, but they certainly have been for a long time. All right, so here we go on to tea. John Milner said, you know, everything was wonderful. Here was a whole community in which I felt very much at home. The atmosphere was, however, as competitive as it was friendly. Insults and one-upsmanship were always major ingredients in tea time banter. The common room was where the young bucks warily sized each other up, bluffed and postured, and locked horns. I mean, that's a fantastic way of describing it. I avoided tea when I was at the university. I mean, so here I am missing out this whole opportunity for people, you know, they're talking about mathematics, but it was bad for my psyche to be in that environment, so I avoided it. And I lost a lot, but I gained something by surviving. There are these things about the culture that can make it extremely difficult for women. So what do we do about it? Try to provide the support that young women might not get within their departments, and try to provide atmospheres where one can have this intellectual engagement without the put-downs. I'd like to say one thing about that, which is that in my interaction with John Kahn, I mean, somebody has written about the fact, you know, published it, how much we argue together when we're doing things. I mean, we fight tooth and nail for trying to say whether our interpretation of what the right way to approach the problem is. But it's, you know, we're not being nasty. We're not putting each other down. it is certainly a there've come some great collaborative work out of this. We had, as I say, we have this mutual respect even when we are
I have a lot of good stories about that.
vigorously, fighting for our viewpoints. So another thing one can do is to try to counter maybe some of these small injustices by trying to add small justices to on an individual basis to talk about mathematics and explain things to your daughters. I saw someone did a study of people taking girls to museums versus their boys, and the amount of time that they spent explaining things to the boys was larger than they spent explaining things to the girls. Parents, I think we should have an explain things to your daughters day, like, take your daughter to work, explain things to your daughter. Although my father was a lawyer and my mother a high school gym teacher, the family I didn't come from, the family I came from weren't mathematicians, but the family I produced seems to be. My late husband was, and all three of our children are, including two daughters. And if you think it's genetics, well, two of the children were stepchildren of mine, so I think it's because we all thought mathematics was the most interesting thing you could possibly do. We talked about it at the dinner table. The kids grew up drawing their pictures on the back of pieces of papers that had mathematics on it. That was the scratch paper. So somehow just trying to provide the atmosphere where doing mathematics is regarded as a fun and interesting thing, and try to keep all these gnat-like injustices away from people.
Thank you. I think we have about half an hour left, and we did want to have some discussion with the audience. If you're not prepared to say anything, I'm sure we can go on, but in the time-honored tradition of moderators, I've arranged a planted question, being very direct about that. Marcia Berger, the organizer of this panel, has agreed to ask a question, and so, Marcia, after that, it's not set up.
Okay, thank you. I would like to follow up on something that Jean alluded to in her presentation, which is that people outside of mathematics often think it is possible to judge mathematical work objectively. A proof is correct or it's not. People with experience on the inside know that this is often not the case. If the proof of a big theorem builds on work of others, how much credit goes to the person who did the final work as opposed to the people who laid the foundations? If a proof is joint work, who contributed the major ideas? Now, people often say that in these subjective evaluations, women come out on the negative side. So would the panel please comment on this?
Okay, shall we start? Or, well, we'll take it as people want. Dues, I can see you.
Well, I was going to speak to something about the how objective our evaluation of mathematics is. I know there's a myth that really we can judge very carefully, what's excellent work. I think there definitely are some criteria, but especially when it comes to hiring young people, I think that when we hire a young person, we were looking for a new assistant professor, we don't just look at their achievements, but we look at their potential, their promise. And I think it's much easier for us to sort of slot a young man into the bright, potentially brilliant young man than to take a young woman and slot her into the potentially bright, brilliant young woman, because we have so few models of what brilliant young women look like. Young women are often seem to be more unsure of themselves. They may get married, they may have kids, there may be all kinds of things. Somehow just sort of you look at them and it's hard to treat them just the same as a man somehow. That you look at them, the whole presentation of a person, you have expectations of what somebody would look like. I mean, one of the wonderful things for me was when I came to this country, I'd always been the only woman in the maths department in Britain, but I came here and there were other women, there were new young women coming up, and none of them looked at all like what I thought a young woman mathematician should look like. Not at all. They were completely different. Some of them actually wore high heels and they wore makeup and they dressed nicely, and other ones they're just very different. And I think we don't have the right models to judge people, and I think that's very important. I mean, things are very subjective. They're much more subjective than I think mathematicians think they are.
Other comments from other panelists? Well, I want to, sorry, Karen. Yeah.
Well, I've tried to examine this very carefully. One of the problems is that we women are not any different than other people in falling into these difficulties. And I do begin to suspect that it's easier for a thesis advisor to think that the male student is like him and therefore brilliant. And it's easier, it's natural. And you say, does it really matter? I said, well, I'm just disappointed that there aren't more people looking like me coming after me. I'm disappointed. I'm not saying maybe that this is right or wrong. I'm just saying that I'm disappointed. I think there's an awful lot of subjectivity. Deuce and I have argued about this. I think that one of the biggest boosts I had to my career is that I married a famous name. Deuce, on the other hand, married out of a famous name. So you see, I claim I gained something, and she lost it. But you see, these are things. Now, little things like that can help, because they say, yes, famous.
They're too little to help. Perhaps I'm the only non-mathematician here. I come from engineering. I'm a World War II story. I've been running engineering groups since I'm 18. I never heard girls can't do welding, riveting, designing, or anything until after the war, and by then it was too late to tell me. I think, listening to this panel, that you are maybe 5-8 years behind some of the other professional women's groups. Women are now in law schools and medical schools in about their right proportions, 40 to 50%. In engineering, the conference last summer was that women are only about 17% are going into engineering. And WEPAN, that's the Program Directors of Women Engineering Studies in colleges. The point was how to get into the schools early, how to get the girls. And every single seminar would have lifted your heart. They were tapes of, you're in the 6th grade, in the 7th grade. I remember one girl, maybe she's 9 or 10, and for $2,000 you could buy the parts to a robot and put it together, and it does something wonderful like throw ping pong balls or something. And she's done that, and she has this look on her face, and she says, I'm good at math, but I didn't know I could do this with math. What's going to happen to her? She'll be a mathematician. This was an engineering group. The general rule is that when you get to 20%, you're no longer the other. Jackie Robinson was the first black. Otherness, and I've not been black, and I haven't been in a wheelchair, and I'm not gay, but I think I've heard everything else. I've had whole crews that were anti-Semitic. That took 20 seconds. So I would like to cheer you up. I don't quite know how to do that, but you won't do it anecdotally. You won't do it there's no way you can be anything but subjective. You need to get those girls down there, the smart ones, thinking about mathematics as, you all talk with the thing that is so marvelous about any work, which is passion, that you love to do it. I've been running a company we manufacture, and then last point. I can only tell you that when there's 26, 28 people there with advanced degrees, mostly physics and metallurgy. If you walk in the door, there's nothing that my senses can tell you about whether you'll fill the bill for a job. Nothing. That's an amazing thing to know. Never mind male, female, black, white, old, young, fat, skinny. Nothing at all. Talk about being objective. How do you hire someone? If you know that, you'll find mathematicians.
To take chances, because I've heard people say, well, if we could get a woman in the National Academy of Sciences, we would hire her. Now we've seen that there are 8 total, and so half of them are in this room, and therefore the others sort of get left out. And that's another thing. I think people just don't want to take chances. Right, you had a question. Actually, can you say who you are and where you're from? I should have said that before.
My name is Hera Wiener. I'm from New York City. And I'd like to address this question to the entire panel. Many of the discoveries in theoretical mathematics and science have been made by individuals at very early ages. When we speak about women who have many who have a diminished sense of self, who don't have as many role models, and it takes longer to develop a strong sense of their own self-identity, how do you propose that we compensate for this, since it takes longer for women to come into their own, rise above the circumstances of sexism and a diminished self-esteem? I mean, so that they can make these discoveries at early ages, which seems to be the pattern for highly theoretical areas.
Okay, I know we'll have interesting views on that. Mary.
You hit on one of my bugaboos here. What you said is largely a myth, and it's a very destructive myth. And when you look at the top 10 departments, yes, you have Noam Elkies, but then you have a huge number of people who are not Noam Elkies. And yes, Galois died when he was, 21. But to hold that up is just destructive, and it's not even true. And at this point, mathematics has become so very technical that at age 25, you're still in graduate school learning what an elliptic curve is. And it's just no longer true that the great work is being done exclusively or even significantly by people under 25, much less under 30. And I know, 50-year-old, 55-year-old, 60-year-old mathematicians who are doing some of the best work of their entire career right now. So I think there's this misperception that we've been propagating to try and appear sexy and exciting, kind of like the guy in the play who was desperately trying to pick up that girl by making mathematicians sound like they're idiots. I mean, we've got some bad PR out there.
Other comments?
Well, I do think that we've privately anyway done the study, and most women mathematicians do their best work later than most men mathematicians. So, and they also, many of us have not come the standard route. And so the one answer there that I really have to admit is that open up more routes. Right, that I really think I think mathematics would be much healthier, but try telling academia that.
I sometimes wonder if that comment about 25 was made when life expectancy was 40. I would be interested in knowing that, because I agree completely with Mary. I think it's a poisonous stereotype, and it's repeated a lot, and I just don't think it's true. Thank you. Yes? Your name?
Excuse me? Yes.
Who are you and where are you from, please?
I'm Hessie Taft, and I'm from New York City, although I've spent most of my adult life living in Princeton, New Jersey. I am also not a mathematician, so there's more than one here. My background is in chemistry, specifically in biochemistry. And I'd like to re-ask the question, the very first question that was asked, because I think the panel did not get a chance to really answer that. In my field, in chemistry, it is a well-known scandal, and which is probably known to everyone in this room, about the Watson and Crick model of DNA, which would never have been, and those guys got the Nobel Prize, without the work of Rosalind Frankel. Now, let me re-ask the question that was first asked here. How do you, as women mathematicians, view the giving of males as giving credit to previous work, not only to themselves, but to other males and especially to other women? I mean, there's also been much discussion in mathematics, and I venture to say about the various contributions that came about that led to the proof of Fermat's last theorem. And so I'd like to know how you feel how men in mathematics give credit to other men and to other women for other work, their associated work.
Margaret?
Yes.
I'd like to say I think you touched on a very crucial point, and there are several such cases in chemistry. There's Rosalind Franklin, There's also in physics with Yang and Lee, and there's still another one. Okay, never mind. No, that's not the one I was thinking of. But at any rate, the fact is I have never run across that in mathematics. And I think it has to do with the nature of proof. It's not so easy. You see, after all, Watson and Crick swiped Rosalind Franklin's X-rays.
Right.
Well, you can't swipe mathematics like that.
How about giving credit to work that was done in building towards the final proof, the steps that led to the final proof?
Well,
in the theorem?
That could be, but I must say I have not run across that.
Well, no, I mean, I think I was always given credit for the contribution I made to Donaldson's Fields Medal. I can't say that. One thing is that there's so few women that they were sort of noticeable, and you couldn't get away with saying they hadn't done anything, maybe. I don't know. It does seem to be different. I mean, actually, there is something to that about math that's a bit clean. You know what I mean? That is true, and it's not like English, for example, right? Well, I picked it. I didn't want to say anything too personal.
Actually, I want to say one thing about that. I'm overstepping my role as moderator, but it's okay. I think in co-authored papers, sometimes there's a tendency for mathematicians, and maybe in other fields too, to say, but who did the real work? You know, there's sort of three authors, and there's this, I think, again, it's a false image that one person had to have thought of the main idea. And I've heard women be disparaged in that context, where they'll say, well, she just did the details, he thought of the idea, and of course the idea is what counts. But the credit giving to prior work, I haven't myself heard of terrible examples of this. Yes, you've been waiting very patiently.
Thank you. Thank you. I think I've become convinced. By the way, I'm George Horton from Rutgers University. And I think I've become convinced that there is a problem. And I'd like to ask you how you feel about the concept that administrations in universities should provide special incentives to departments of mathematics or physics, etc., in order to encourage young talent to find a home and to correct some of these problems. We've seen that work effectively in other contexts, and I'd like to have your reaction to that.
I think we're all for it.
Actually, I think they often do. Math departments are often the last holdouts.
Dusa, did you have something to?
Well, I agree. I think it's a good idea. I think it has to be done very carefully. Always these programs have to be done carefully. But I think in general, it is a good idea.
I think they have to be done carefully. I agree with Dusa. I heard of a program at Princeton, for example, where they would give special positions to women, but only in tenured positions, so they wouldn't be caught in this bind, you know, where they come up for tenure and then people say, oh, she only got the job because she was a woman. By the way, I can't tell you how sick I am of the phrase, we want a qualified woman, you know, as if we want an unqualified woman. But I thought that was pretty good, and I believe it worked pretty well at Princeton because they were women with unquestioned scientific stature. And then they got in, and I can tell you, I think from everyone's experience, it matters. Once you have one woman, it's more attractive to others. So I think getting it started is a very good idea. I am in favor of that. Yes, over here?
Oh, thank you very much. My name is Judith Engel, and I had a very long career at the Bronx High School of Science in New York City. And I'd like to preface my comment with this. I love children, the teaching, learning process, really. We're calling it facilitating, guiding, and mathematics like strawberry shortcake with cream from the Netherlands. Now, about 5 years ago, our principal decided to have an all-girls class in science, give the students 10 periods a week, and so that they could shine, so to speak, on the New York State regions.
Could you get closer to the mic?
I'm sorry?
Closer to the mic.
Oh, yeah, certainly. Shall I repeat what I said?
No.
5 years ago, my principal decided that it would be a good idea to have 10 periods a week for girls only in science. So it happened that we had the regents, and I went in there. I said, you know, the only students of mine who got 100 on the New York State regents were girls. So then he came back with, then we need to have an all-boys class. Well, I think it has a lot to do with the teacher. I never saw, in fact, till the end of one year that there were more boys in the class than girls. I just didn't notice that at all. And anyway, but in the high school, and perhaps in lower grades, it has a lot to do with the teacher's attitude towards mathematics and how the teacher comes through. I was very enthusiastic about mathematics, and I still am, and I really have a deep passion for my subject. I want to relate one more thing. I sent my 8-year-old grandniece a wonderful book, grade 3 in mathematics. I was so excited about it. And I asked my niece, how did Karen like the book? She liked it. She didn't like it a lot. And then my niece came back with, well, it's a math book. And I wrapped it very carefully, wrote a note on a triangle, pasted it onto a circle, and did symmetry. It's really a great book, and the child really is quite bright in mathematics. Thank you.
Any comments?
What's the book?
The book was from a publisher. I can't give you the title. I don't know it offhand, but I could locate it if you were interested in it. I know where I got the book from. I'm very sorry I don't know the source of the book. Thank you for asking. I'm glad you did.
Yes?
Thank
Please?
you. My name is David Grace. I went to the Bronx High School of Science. I'm not sure if I got 100 on both math regions. I know I got 100 on one of the regions. I went to an undergraduate school where there were 855 undergraduates, and 854 of them were men. And they asked Jerry Vaccarelli, why'd you come to RPI? And she told us that she wanted to find a husband, and everybody, 854 of us, said, you will. And she did. Rensselaer, as you may know, is the oldest science and engineering college in the United States. Granted, it's the first degrees in science to women in the Western Hemisphere in the 30s. That's not the 1930s. That's the 1830s. And don't you hate people that come up to a question microphone with no question? I promise I have 2 questions. Rensselaer now has, as its president, a woman, the first woman to head a major technological university in the United States. So, continuing my preamble, the panel before had 6 brilliant panelists. And counting, not counting, double counting, this panel also has 6 brilliant panelists, or 6 brilliant women on the panel. I would only say that the difference I see between these 2 panels is this panel, unfortunately, is an embittered panel. So I would ask you one question. This is the tongue-in-cheek question. If they don't get it, couldn't you just forget about it? Don't worry about it. Maybe you could take that as proof that they're not as smart as they think they are. And here's the other real question. In the quote that I think Dr. Wright, who we've come finally to know as Marcia, in reading that quote from Gauss in a letter, was I incorrect? I remember reading this somewhere, and I remember Gauss writing to Sophie, and I didn't see the play.
Well, it's in the program for this symposium.
Yeah, it's in the program, but I think there's
It says it was from a letter to Gauss to someone else talking about Sophie Germain, not letter to her. The author of the play can perhaps enlighten us about this. I just took it from the play.
I see. I think I've seen this quote before, and I would have laughed when they mentioned Sophie's name, because I not only knew she was born in 1776 because of its matching with the Constitution, but that she was born on April 1st. It's making this kind of an April Fool's joke. But I think if you go back and look at that quote, Gout says something to the effect, after he gets to the part about more difficulties than men, given our prejudices. I think it's Gauss is recognizing at that point. So all I can say is if you might check on whoever did that check and see if anybody remember that quote directly, I would like to know. And then as far as the question you've asked, which is what can you do? I think the only thing I could suggest is keep doing what you do best. Great math. Thank you.
Would anyone like to comment on that? No? I'd actually like to say that I think there's always a difficulty. I mentioned this, and I don't mean to pick on you, but the quote I mentioned about whining, I think it's very difficult actually for women to get up and say anything negative, because what we're supposed to do is get up and say, oh, things are getting better, isn't it wonderful, we love our work. I give lots of talks to little girls, and that's exactly what I do because I love my work. But when you talk about reality, you have to talk about reality, and I think I don't detect anything like embitterment. I detect reality, and we're still here, and we're still trying, and we're trying to do things better. But if we say nothing, then I think the picture is too rosy. Charlie, oh, sorry, who's next? You, right?
Mary
I think we're getting near the. Do we have 5 more minutes? Okay, so
Sorry. Yeah.
please.
From Mary Padilla from Northern Westchester. There was some point made about the small proportion of women and so forth. I started in the sciences in research, but I ended up in an applied profession, which is veterinary medicine. And interestingly enough, our class was the first to be 50% women, and now the profession is 3/4 women. There's been a change. It's become a pink-collar ghetto. Veterinary medicine now, there's very sort of relatively low pay scale. Very few of the women are practice owners. There are a lot of people working part-time. There's no superstructure in the university or anything like that forcing us to do this because most veterinarians are self-employed. This is a social issue. This is a self-image issue. This is something that one needs to keep in mind. Also, competing responsibilities. Who is going to take care of the children? I found research and basic biology and so forth discouraging for many of the reasons that you mentioned, and switched over to this field to enable me to have a life. Now that my daughter's in college, I'm going back to playwriting, to write about science, which is what part of the symposium is supposed to be about, to approach creativity from another direction. Keep in mind, I think, perhaps you could address this, whether really the issue is just that you need more women, or whether there's more to it than that.
Okay.
I'm Charlie Peskin from the Courant Institute. I just wanted to ask if there's a difference on the issues that we've been discussing between pure and applied math.
This is something we talked about in email.
We had a lot of email discussion about this, so I think I will let the participants speak to that point.
I thought
Catherine should start.
Well, there was some correspondence between the panelists, and that question came up, and somebody, I don't remember anymore who, said that there were more women applied mathematicians than pure mathematicians, and I can only say that that's not been my experience. Perhaps it's developing that way. In fact, it only reminded me of an incident where I was working at that time in plasma physics, and a colleague said to me, I can understand a woman who goes into algebra, but one who works in plasma physics, I don't understand that at all. So you see, the idea that women do pure mathematics was more acceptable than the idea that they should do applied stuff, so that may have led to changes.
I'd like to say something which is actually also relevant to the last speaker, because I think we haven't talked much about the practical difficulties of being a woman in mathematics and how you manage a career in an academic institution with this very tight tenure clock and try and have a family, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that one thing about applied mathematics is you can do that in industry. It's a more forgiving career structure. It can be. I mean, I think academic applied math is probably much the same as academic pure math, but I think if you think about people working in companies, you can take some years off. It's easier to get back in. I think there are a lot of practical difficulties for women that we haven't talked about, and I don't see that I want to say much more about that now. But
Jean, do you have?
No, I thought it was you who expressed this issue of cachet the best. So
Well, we talked about, Dusa said that in the view of some pure mathematicians, applied math doesn't have much cachet, and that's why women were okay in applied math. And then we got into the, well, in applied math, pure math doesn't have much cachet, so we thought that it was, and what we basically, through a good humored email discussion, came to was the final quote that was put up there, I think, which was that whatever it is that has cachet, women are not supposed to be good at it. And so we don't actually have data. I think this would be an interesting thing to get data on. I don't feel comfortable speaking about it without knowing more facts. Okay?
Well, certainly there was the movement of women into computer science in the early years out of mathematics. And it was, computer science was viewed as a new field, as a very good field for women. And that's certainly something that's disappeared.
Right.
So.
Yes.
My name is David Margolis. I'm a sculptor, painter. I'll go back to Pearl Harbor. The question came out, the contribution to the war effort. David Smith, a friend of mine, a sculptor, he went to Bayonne to be a welder, and I went to Greenpoint to be a tool and die maker. When I came on the job, a woman was next to me, working on the lathe, next to me. I think she was a great mathematician, because we had to work in blueprint, 1,000th of an inch. Ladies and gentlemen, we couldn't make a mistake because the war was going on. She done an excellent job. Should she be alive now? I think she'll be a great scientist. No question about it. We couldn't make a mistake because another part went to another part. And God bless her soul, she passed away many years ago. But she could be definitely. After the war, I spoke to her, she wanted to go to the university, take up science, no question about it. And I think she went on the coast and I lost track of her. But, ladies and gentlemen, she was fantastic. Lifting up those heavy weights and the spirit in that human being, I will never forget.
What was her name again?
Could you answer on that?
Thank you. One thing that happens to me sometimes is people will tell me about some relative they had, a woman relative who could have been a very talented scientist and for a variety of reasons was not able to do that. I always think such things are very moving. Thank you. Okay, I think we only have time for, do we have time for one more?
Let's take 3.
2? All right, 2. Okay.
Michael Overton, Courant Institute. My question is about the subject. It was already mentioned that in law and medicine, it's pretty much equality if you look at top graduate schools. And other subjects too, like literature. I mean, I don't think there's any really very much disparity about who are considered the great writers. What is it about the subject of mathematics and the mathematical sciences and sciences and engineering that allows this disparity to continue? I think, you know, in the past it probably was common to say that women couldn't do it. I don't think here, I think in this room, probably very, very few people believe that's the reason. I think the reason must be because there must be something about the nature of the subject that just allows women and girls to get discouraged somehow more easily than, let's say, in law and medicine. But to me, that's a very strange thing. I don't understand it. Does anybody have any comment on that?
Well, you remember 30% of the graduate school on the average are women. So that's a lot of women who haven't been discouraged.
Remember, I mean, everybody here knows about, or a lot of people know about exponential growth, all right? 1% difference in one interaction with somebody doesn't make much difference. But after, you have 20 such interactions, it adds up. It keeps growing. There is, you can't, it's just, all of these little things wind up making eventually a big difference. But this, as I read to you, the quote about the common room. I don't think this is a matter of the subject. I think it's a matter of the culture that, in a certain way, that there's a selection for a kind of aggressive put down of other people. This is what happens in the Math Olympiad kids. This is what, I mean, there is something that gets rewarded about that kind of behavior and gets to be thought of as something that has to be part of what it means to be a mathematician. And if girls don't act that way, then they keep losing this little bits of status.
Just a very quick response. I mean, I'm not at all putting down the importance of those things, but it seems to me those things must be present in medicine and law too. That's all.
Well, I'd like to say just something, because I think that, there are a lot of very aggressive women lawyers these days, and they enjoy being aggressive women lawyers, and there are women in business who are enjoying being women in business, and they certainly have to be aggressive. I think it may be partly just a sociological thing that perhaps the women who are talented and who want to have a career want to go into something that's more recognized by society. Certainly professional careers are more acceptable. More understandable to their parents and their peers. And mathematics and science is rather abstract, and nobody's very intellectual here. It doesn't have much cachet in America, and so it may just take a while. It may be, after things like being a lawyer or being an actuary, people find it's not so wonderful, or being a doctor, you're saying that it's not always so great to be a doctor, that perhaps the scientific professions will have more attraction to, because women can certainly be aggressive and can enjoy it.
Okay, I can't tell one more question? Okay, so it's you. Sorry. Yes.
So, my name is Nava Rubin. I'm from the neuroscience department here at NYU. And interestingly, I was going to ask the same question that was asked before, but you don't gain time, because I was also going to offer an answer that was touched upon, but not really brought up. Which is that it is the unconscious, unaware biases that are a lot more difficult to shake, because there are a lot more, because we're not aware of them. So, for example, the gentleman that just asked the question said, of course, everybody in that room, in this room, don't believe da-da-da. We don't believe when you ask me, but when you do the experiment that Professor Taylor told us about, it's people like us. It is us who rank, including women, who rank the female-speaking computer as being not as, informative. And when I learned about those studies, I was really, really very shocked. But what shocked me more is that over the years, people tell it as an anecdotal sort of thing, but they don't seem to realize the connection that this has to what women expect from themselves, what girls expect from themselves, etc. And so I think it's important because it relates to your question of how to solve this problem. If you know why the problem is more, say, in math than in medicine, then it's a first step towards solving it. And I want to propose that this is why the myth about, now you can ask why the myth about math was created in the first place. I don't know. But the fact that it exists now creates a very difficult situation, especially if I may say, you can hear from my accent, I'm not American. And as an outsider, the American society is very legalistic. So people have a tendency to think that if all the laws were made and like Professor Pugh suggested that hiring will be done in a, you know, kind of standardized way, etc., that will solve the problem. And there is very little awareness to the power that unconscious social cues have over people's life decisions. And so maybe the first step is just to make your male you know, colleagues aware that it is us who are the subjects in those experiments. It's not some stupid people in a mall.
Okay, so this has been great. I wish we could go on for hours, but we can't. So I want to say that we've tried to talk today about what we think is a problem, and even though we're mathematicians, we haven't come up with a solution, let alone a proof, but we feel that, we do feel that there has been some progress, and I can assure you that everyone here and all the other women I know, some in the audience, are going to keep trying to make things better. So thanks a lot, and you're welcome to join refreshments across the hall before the next panel. Thanks a lot.